Welcome, everyone. Thank you very much to everyone who could join us today from various parts of the world, countries, cities. Very glad to have all of you here. My name is Anand Taparia. I take care of marketing here at Utthunga, which means me and my team have the responsibility to take the word out to the rest of the world in terms of the industrial product engineering work that we do. It's our endeavor that we bring topics of interest from the industrial world to our listeners via leaders of the industry, via thought leaders. And hence, it's my pleasure today. We have Steve Biegacki, who's also the managing director of FDT Group here. And the session is Migration to FDT UE, the Unified Environment, also called FDT 3.0. So, of course, I'll have Steve introduce himself. Just a quick word. I mean, Steve is a veteran of this industry with stints at Rockwell Automation in various capacities, Belden, Kramer Electronics, BDO. So, Steve, I'll let you introduce yourself. And of course, given in this incarnation of yours as the FDT MD, your personality is sort of indistinguishable from the FDT group. So if you could kind of also give a context of FDT technology and set the context for today's session, FDT
Sure,
3.0.
sure. Yeah, I'd be happy to. So as Anand said, Steve Biegacki, I actually live in the United States. I've been the managing director since January, so it hasn't been very long yet, maybe about 6 months or so. It's been kind of an exciting time with FDT. I took over from a guy who did a great job for years before me, Glenn Schultz. My background, as Anand says, I worked for a number of years at Rockwell in a whole bunch of different positions. In fact, I was responsible for the creation of the SIP protocol and effectively the ODVA organization back in the 90s. I mean, and back then, we thought nobody talked about the industrial Internet of Things, right? We just talked about how do we communicate with devices on the factory floor. So now everybody talks about the Internet of Things, industrial Internet of Things. I'm like, okay, now it's got an official name and everybody's on the bandwagon. But quite frankly, I hate to break anybody's bubble here, but we invented that stuff back in the 90s. Okay. So that's nothing new. But I do think what's new about things, though, is the fact that there are so many commercially available technologies now that actually take advantage of that, whether it's those networks or, other networks that are standards now. And one of the things about the FDT group is the fact that it's been an organization that's been in business for years. Again, it's not new, okay? But what is new is this whole concept of FDT 3.0 or FDT UE in the market, which is this FDT unified environment, okay? And I think that's kind of the big story here, and the fact that we've got this migration path of millions of DTMs that are in the field today that have been built on 1.2 specification. Perhaps some were done in FDT 2.0, and now we've got FDT 3.0. And I think the team has done a wonderful job basically doing a lot of good work to base the development on real user requirements for the things that users were looking for, okay? And I think that's kind of an important element here, is that this is a very user-driven standard, a lot of user input, and that put into action. We can talk about some of the specifics there as we go through this conversation today. So it's an exciting time. I'm a new guy, but I get to also marshal kind of the FDT3 technology forward and help the industry out here, hopefully, and they'll see the benefits of it.
Sure, great. Thanks, Steve. And I'm sure FDT Group is definitely in good hands. Quick housekeeping points, very briefly. This is a 30-minute session, so we'll keep the last 5 minutes for questions from the people tuned in. You can post your questions through the comments in your LinkedIn page. So look forward to getting your questions. Hopefully we can answer as many as we can in the time allotted. All right, so I've got a lot of questions. I mean, it could really be a rapid fire and it could still not be done, but I'll try to really make sure that, for the people tuned in and people who are going to watch this video later on through YouTube and other media, they get a sense of what it takes to migrate to, FDT 3.0. The 1 version, 2 versions have, been there, adopted by industries globally, system vendors, device vendors. So let's talk about FDT 3.0, FDT UE. Steve, just to get started, and the first obvious question, I mean, with any new generation technology is, what are the benefits of migrating to FDT UE?
Right, right. And I think, it's really to build on what was done in the traditional FTT. And we talked about, I mentioned 1.2 and 2.0, where, really the goal there was to do basic, I don't even know if I'd call it basic, but device management, okay? Device integration and lifecycle management of devices in the field, things like device configuration, commissioning, monitoring, things like that, okay? The benefits to moving forward, okay, are first of all, one is that we're not necessarily tied to a Windows platform anymore. The new FDT3 spec actually allows us to be platform independent. So whether we're using Windows, or we're using Linux, or Mac OS, all those are possible. Okay, so that's one of the benefits. One of the other benefits is some of the things that have been done around security. And also the fact that it makes it easy now for people to create apps, their own custom apps, if they'd like to, based on the FTT 3.0 standard. In fact, we've got one vendor company, member company, Flowserve, that's just done a wonderful job creating custom apps for asset management, for example. It's just been easy for them to do because of the way the spec's written up. I think one of the bigger things, though, is the fact that we've created this thing called an FDT hub. And this really takes care of some of the issues that users talk to us about maintaining and having a central repository to get data around the different types of devices that they've actually got in their facility. Typically, that's been maybe a little difficult from the user standpoint, in that they had to go off and go to different websites to maybe find the parameters and the details around a device. Now with the FDT hub, which is standard in FDT3 and in the unified environment, it's in one place. It's one repository. Okay, so as people build DTMs, they basically get deposited into the hub, and it's one place for people to go and actually download the parameters and the different standards and interfaces that they need for those devices. Okay, obviously. I think one of the other things is the fact that we've also got, this concept of server. So in the past, people had a desktop application that they would use to do some of the things I mentioned before. Today, you can have multi-users, right? And I think that's one of the bigger differences, is the fact that we got this server, we've got actually this thing called the FDT server, which has an embedded OPC UA server in it, a web server, and those really data now to be more ubiquitous, if you will, or usable throughout the enterprise, where before maybe it was just kind of locked into a desktop application. So those are just some of the major changes.
Got it. Great. Thanks. You mentioned quite a bit of technologies, Windows, Mac, of course, security, the FTT hub, which is features, servers, and all. So, I mean, typically, of course, we want to kind of remain focused towards the end user community today, but we do see end users also getting interested in the technology at the background. So let me just get this question out of the way, and then just understand from you. So, what are the technologies does the FDT UE support at this moment?
Yeah, so really, it's based on using modern technology that's being used, things like HTML5, .NET standard, okay, are a couple of the things that are probably different now than maybe were in the past. And I think that basically, although, could benefit the user, it probably also benefits the development community too. Make it easier to build products and or contemporary technologies to enable that.
Got it. Okay. I'm just experiencing some network disturbance. I hope it's not too common. So hopefully it's not going to disturb other people. You did mention earlier, Steve. You did cover FDT Hub, but just wanted to see if you can cover a little more in terms of as the DTM repository. Wanted to hear your thoughts on how the FDT Hub is eliminating device management headaches. An area perhaps of concern and of
Yeah.
importance to users?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the challenges that users always had was getting the across the, and I'll call it across the entire life cycle of a device. Okay, everything from the design to the installation to the operation to the maintenance, kind of the life cycle of the device itself, is having a consistent repository or a consistent place to go to get information about that device. Imagine from a maintenance standpoint that on a whatever shift in a plant that a device goes bad and has to be replaced. Okay, the idea of having this hub, it provides us a single repository that the user can have access to for all certified FDT3 DTMs. Okay, now where that hub resides relative to the user and their application could be on their premise if they'd like to. It could be in the cloud. I mean, that's there's options there. Okay, but suffice it to say, if you think about it as this repository that has all the details around every certified FDT3 DTM that automatically can get downloaded, all right, into the application of the user's facility. And it's a thing that works a little bit like, and I'm always hesitant to use this, but it's the simplest example of, think about when you plug in a new printer driver, or you plug in a new device like a mouse or something like that into your computer. The computer now goes off and finds out the drivers for that thing. Well, that's how the hub works. All right. So it auto detects products. If you plug a new product on the network, it'll go off and find it and bring the information down and actually make it usable within the FDT environment. So the hub is a way to actually really simplify managing devices and making that a lot easier. So one single repository for all FDT3 certified DTMs, and end users basically no longer have to hunt for finding different websites for their DTMs. They're not there was an update, nobody knew about the update. Well, this way it keeps it all current. Okay.
Yeah. Great. Thanks. There's the other topic, perhaps in older days we did not get so much attention, but lately, of course, end user attention to security is definitely, very perceptible, visible. FDT UE, states, it's secure by design. So can you just elaborate a little more on that, what it means, secure by design?
Yeah, secure by design. I mean, really what we're talking about is, the kind of secure in depth from the standpoint of having encrypted communications. Okay, so TLS, on-wire security for the able protocols, because it's one of the things that, the devices actually hook up on, could be on multiple protocols. And, we can talk about that. We support multiple connectivity protocols that are out there that are in the industry. We've got role-based security that we use. And then, of course, 509 V3 certificates. So, I think the fact that the organization has focused on making sure that those were part of the specification and are supported, is the whole idea of kind of having it secure by design as we go forward here.
All right. So you touched upon protocol.
There's always going to be, we understand that, but I think the foundation is there today that we can build on as we go forward.
Got it. Yeah, absolutely. Always an evolving area, and makes sense what you said.
Yes.
You touched upon protocols, Steve, and so I just want to kind of get also your sort of share with the listeners. How many and what kind of protocols does FDT UE support? If you could.
Yeah. So there are a number that are part of the standard. In fact, they're treated that way through what's called an annex, to the standard. We effectively think of ourselves as being network agnostic. Okay, a lot of times, I'll get questions from people where they're trying to actually get FDT involved in the network. I don't know if I call them network wars, but the network, standards that are out there, they're not really wars. They were back in the 90s. Okay. But today, there's obviously a number of different networks that are industry standards, and you can see, on this page here, right, CAN Open, CC Link, all the SIP protocols, FDI, okay, HART, and so on, Profibus, and Modbus, okay. So we support all those networks, all right. It's basically a way for us to be, as I mentioned, network agnostic. That we can go ahead and actually support these networks. So that way the user doesn't have to necessarily choose a specific network protocol to be able to use and take advantage of what's an FDT. Okay. Field Device Technology supports all these different network protocols.
Okay. I, of course, see OPC UA also on the list. And I know OPC UA is an important element of the entire technology. I would like to ask some questions a little later. But now that we've touched upon some elements, FTT Hub, and some benefits that you mentioned, just kind of to help summarize and really bring home the point. What does it mean for vendors and end users? What does it take rather for them to migrate to FTT UA? Given everything
Yeah.
you've
So
shared.
obviously, yeah, that's a good question. I mean, obviously, we've got a number of good development partners that are members of our organization that can help a manufacturer, a vendor of a product, bring their product forward. But to enable that, we've really got a set of common components we've created. These are basically toolkits, all right, that enable people to build ATMs. It enables people to build frame applications. It enables them to build server applications. And that way, and this is an important point, and sometimes we get caught up in this. And I've had this happen a couple times. FDT organization is a standards organization. It's an IEC standard, all right. 62453, okay. We also have a set of tools that basically help people build products to the standard. We are not a standalone application, okay. We're an enabler. We're enabling technology, and I'm sure other people have found out ways to do this. As I mentioned, some of our development partners that are part of the organization. So from a vendor standpoint, there's, as I mentioned, there's toolkits, okay, for all the different ways that you might want to interface, whether it's the desktop, a DTM, or the server, okay. And that allows people to actually go ahead and really focus on adding their value and not have to worry about, how do they actually adhere to the standard, okay, so it becomes, compliant and works with all the other in the FDT ecosystem, if you will. So the toolkits are probably the main thing to start with. And then, as I mentioned, some of the development partners that are involved, just like you guys would, be able to help out also from a vendor standpoint. Okay. There is a whole style guide that's written. Products have to support that style guide and so on. There's a test and certification process. But I'd say if you use the toolkits, I think you're in good shape. It'll lead you down the right road.
Right. Now, a connected thing that comes to probably mind is, for people who have legacy investments, done into the legacy FTT technologies, they probably would have concerns. So how does FTT UA address that piece?
Yeah. So the one thing is that all of the DTMs that are in the field today, because that's where the most of the work is, the number of devices, if you will, are all compatible with FDT3. Okay. So there's no requirement to go off and change your DTMs. Okay. If you've got devices, if you want to take advantage of, say, for example, some of the things that are in FDT3 on the host side, like the server or the web server, things like that, you can still communicate with those 1.2 devices. Okay. There are some additional features and access to data, some of the things like some of the business logic and things like that might be in the devices that won't be there because they maybe weren't in the 1.2, but there's no requirement to update all the DTMs. Okay. But I do think that people over time will see maybe there is some benefit to doing that, but I wouldn't say let's go off and have to redo everything. So I think how people may go about this would be to do the FDT desktop or server application on the host side, and support and communicate with all their existing DTMs that are in the field.
Yeah, yeah, of course. I mean, with no rip and replace and the investment safe, I think perhaps gives a more confidence or a safer migration path.
Yeah,
So makes
yeah.
sense.
The whole concept there is to migrate things, right? This is not a let's revolutionize and make people change everything out, but there are some benefits. I think with especially on the host side with the FDT3 tools and so on that I think customers will enjoy.
Good. Yeah. There's this other piece, Steve, with maintenance, being a decent chunk of activity of any device life cycle. And I also see and read that, the FDT UA, the spec, the environment states of enabling a better maintenance strategy. Now, what does it mean, a better maintenance strategy enabled by the new specification?
Yeah, so I would say that in the past, okay, with the previous versions of FTT, you had a desktop application. It was kind of a single user application, so one window into what was going on. Well, today that is now supported by more of a distributed environment because of the way that the FTT servers put together, and it allows a way to have multiple users actually know what's going on. Okay, so I think that's one key area. Uh, it also enables people to have a standard on how they actually work with their devices. So effectively, there's less training involved because once you train, whether it's the maintenance people or whoever, that's we're talking about maintainability here. It looks the same, no matter whose device it is. Everything looks the same. Okay. So I think those are a couple of the things, and I think the other thing is just that all the data and all the way the devices are handled. And this kind of goes with the less training piece is handled very consistently. The standard actually calls that out, and people will see that as they go forward here. So I think there's a number of reasons that it's helping with the maintainability. Storing the data, I think, for the whole life cycle of a device is sort of an important thing, and basically covering that consistency from everything from commissioning to ultimately dismantling of that system, having it all in one place in the FDT hub, having people not to have to search around for things, really help go ahead and help with that maintainability. And one last thing I'd mention is that the fact that there's a central server that can actually implement and enable device service applications or device service operations. For example, the whole concept of using OPC UA, having client access and mobile device access. We didn't really talk about that much, but this whole concept of mobility enabled by the web server that's part of the FTT server is just a huge benefit, okay, in trying to help with that whole maintainability thing.
Yeah. Okay. Of course, I wanted to ask about OPC. We got not so much time, but with OPC UA being a key technology of the FDTE spec, though the OPC UA may remain obscure really to the end users, but I believe it's going to play an important role in providing the plant, the operational data to the other enterprise systems, and that's what OPC UA enables. So I just want to hear your thoughts on that piece, the availability of data via
Yeah,
OPC
it's kind of a big thing, and I think it's maybe one of the best kept secrets right now about the FTT3 spec and UE specifically, and the server part of that. And because the server within FTT3 contains this embedded OPC UA server, which now enables us to communicate to any OPC client that might be out there, which, I mean, automatically just opens up a whole myriad of communications. And we always think about it, from the sensor to the cloud. Okay. Well, that cloud connection, frankly, happens because of this OPC UA server being built into the FTT server. And so if somebody actually takes advantage and uses FTT3, they get the OPC UA server as part of it. Okay. So anything that'll hook up to OPC UA, you've got an instant connection then at that point. And obviously OPC UA is, a terrifically successful standard in the industry. And so now that's because that's an integral part of the FTT3 standard, everybody has access to all the data from the devices all the way up to the cloud. So, and that's embedded. So.
Yeah, that's embedded. And I mean, the sensor to cloud journey covered through OPC UA. And naturally, one of the things with so much data now that's going to reach the cloud, I also understand by virtue of that, FDT or UE also, facilitates device vendors to be able to sell analytics as a service,
Mm-hmm.
typically in end users who may not be necessarily analytics experts would probably shy away from understanding the complexities or nuances or even setting up the infrastructure required. So I just want to hear your thoughts, and it's the last question. We'll probably get to questions in the Q&A for this. How does the FDT UA really enable analytics as a service?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's the biggest is actually by leveraging that OPC UA server, okay, is a piece of it. And it enables basically vendors, I'd say, or manufacturers to create applications, all right, that can actually improve the overall operation of the assets in the field, all right. And I always think of the assets, and some of it's my background, is down at the field device, the point of impact, the actual sensors themselves, okay. The sensors, the actuators, things like that. And the fact that now we can easily get access to all the data. So for example, if I was looking at a valve and I wanted to know how many cycles it was doing, okay, and I wanted to know the speed at which the spool changed, okay, we could monitor that now, all right? And we could actually say, hey, that thing's slowing down, something's going wrong with it, the spring's wearing out, something's happening, okay? And actually proactively help a customer and end user, fix a problem before it may actually be a problem. Okay, so I think the fact that we've got that, people are doing it. In fact, I mentioned one application earlier where we've got one of our member companies doing a good job with trying to providing this analytics as a service with their Red Raven product. Okay, I think it's just a great tool, and it shows really well on what the possibilities are. Okay.
All right. Well, that's the time we have, Steve. We got to pick up a few questions and then see. I guess we do not have time more than a couple of questions. So one question is, FDT technology is platform, independent and data centric. So what does that mean? Platform independent and data centric.
So platform independent from the standpoint of the IT platform operating systems, okay, is the main thing when we talk about platform independence. All right, we can actually operate multiple operating systems, so we're not tied to any Microsoft applications or Linux or anything like that. Okay, it depends on what the products are and what the platform is, if you will, that they want to use. The second part of that was, ask me that again, if you wouldn't mind.
Data centric, platform independent, and data centric.
Yeah, data centric. So really what we're talking about is actually access to the specific data that's actually in the device. And there's an information model, a consistent information model that allows us to, not have to worry about all the different things we have to do to communicate with the device. It's really, what are we going to do with the access of the device information and the information model to actually use that in an application.
All right. So this other question is a scenario where I have a handle, and he mentions a fluke handle to calibrate a field device. But why do I need the FDT server in this case? So it's, I can easily just calibrate directly.
Yeah, the only reason you'd want to have the FDT server in that case, because obviously you've got, it sounds like your mobility through the Fluke device would be to have access to the OPC UA server if there was a need to, transmit that information to other places, other applications within the control system. Okay. But, really that it sounds like a use case around mobility. Mobility is something you get out of the server with the web server, but there may be other benefits beyond mobility. I guess it would be my answer to that. Okay.
Got it. There are a couple of people who wanted to ask questions, but I think we are out of time. We'll try to answer those later, Steve. So, well, thank you, everyone.
We
Yeah,
can
yeah,
take
please.
those through LinkedIn or however we want to do it later. Be happy to answer those for people.
Absolutely.
All right.
Absolutely. Thanks, Steve,
Great.
for sharing all the details. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in. This session, of course, is going to be available on the LinkedIn, page, and of course on YouTube and through FDT Group as well. So hopefully this was a helpful session, just to kind of get a quick primer on what it takes to migrate to FDT 3, also Unified Environment UE. Before just to quickly wrap up, at Utthunga we try to bring these sessions regularly. I request people to follow us on LinkedIn. Just search us on LinkedIn, Utthunga, UTTHUNGA. So you'll probably see a lot of sessions we've done in the past for industry leaders and some coming up as well. In fact, there's one interesting one coming up in 2 weeks from today where we talked to Frank Moritz of SICK, the sensor company SICK AG, and about the role of IO-Link in digitalization. So that's going to be an interesting session. Do tune in and hopefully you get to learn something about that as well. So before we close, just want to hand it over briefly, quickly to Steve. If you have any closing thoughts and close the session, Steve.
Yeah, no, I mean, I appreciate the time. I mean, look, FDT3 was designed, again, with the users in mind. We support process, discrete, and hybrid applications. We've got interfaces to things like IO-Link. You talked about that. I mean, that's where we see a lot of intelligent sensors and, more discrete type sensors. But again, that's the whole concept of UE, okay, is the unified environment for both process, discrete, and hybrid applications. And actually enabling data to be shared throughout the entire enterprise. So
super, thank you so much. There's a lot of information, of course, available on the FDT Group website, so please do check it out, and feel free to reach us, anybody, FDT Group or Utthunga, in case you have questions. We'll be very happy to answer. Thank you again. Thanks, Steve. Thanks, everyone.
thanks.
Have a good
All right,
day.
take care. Bye-bye.